Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Nightlight. Thanks for sharing your time with me. I'm really excited to do this show tonight. First, I want to thank Ken Quiethawk for his amazing intro. You can find him on the internet. He's a native storyteller. All you have to do is Google native storytellers or Ken Quiethawk, and you'll learn about an amazing way of preserving history through time. It's inspiring, and he is an absolute professional, and it's an adventure to listen to their native stories that tell you about cosmology, history, and, well, the creation of everything, actually. I have with me tonight an amazing lady. I have Normandi Ellis with me, and she's written a book called Imagining the World into Existence. And it's a fascinating book about a topic that I've always been, really excited about. Let me tell you a little bit about the book. Drawing from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the pyramid texts, the Book of Thoth, and other sacred hieroglyphic writings spanning 3 millennia of Egyptian mystery traditions, she reveals the magical language of creation and words of power that enabled the ancient Egyptians to act as co-creators with the gods. Examining the power of hieroglyphic thinking, how thoughts create reality, and the multiple meanings behind every word of power, she shows how, with the Neteru, probably didn't pronounce that right, we imagine the world into existence, casting a spell of consciousness over the material world. Uncovering the deep layers of meaning and symbol within the myth of the Egyptian gods and goddesses, she investigates the shamanic journeys the ancient Egyptian priests used to view the unconscious and the afterlife, and shares their initiations for immaculate conceptions, transubstantiation, resurrection, and eternal life, initiations that later became part of the Christian mystery school. Revealing the words of power used by these ancient priests and sorcerers, she explains how to search for the deeper, hidden truths behind their spells and shows how ancient Egyptian consciousness holds the secret of life itself. Revealing the initiatory secrets I have to go back. I lost my place. Revealing the initiatory secrets of the Osirian Mystery School, she provides the essential teachings and shamanic tools needed to return to Zep-Tepi, the creative source, as we face the transitional time of radical change currently at hand. She's an award-winning author, workshop facilitator, and director of Penthouse Retreat Center, the author of many books, including Awakening Osiris and co-authoring of Invoking Scribes of Ancient Egypt. She leads tours to Egypt and shamanic journeys. And in her spare time, she is also a spiritualist minister, astrologer, and certified clairvoyant and medium. She's well-rounded and has so much knowledge and wisdom inside. It's amazing. And I am so delighted to welcome her to the show tonight. Welcome, Normandi.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Well, sometimes people have a bio that could take up the whole 2 hours. So, and I'm sure most people with your kind of credentials, don't do something because it's going to look good on your bio. It's just, here's another area I want to expand into, and then you're off and running.
Oh, that's exactly right. The best way to learn anything in your life is just inquiry, to have restless curiosity.
Well, I think also the fact that you have mastered the art of following your bliss. And, when you do that, then everything just takes on a whole new perspective for you. It's sort of like, this is what I love, and oh boy, look at this. And, when looking at the hieroglyphs, now I've always been fascinated with Egypt and all of the materials there, with certainly from grade school, King Tut's tomb, and then beyond. So, and that was a very long time ago. It was half a century ago. So it's always been a fascination for me, and I've been so delighted to find that there is so much more research going on today that goes beyond just, the fact that, who could have built these, and they couldn't have done it with the copper tools, and into the fact that the hieroglyphs have always fascinated me, and especially with the work that you've done, because it's, when we write things, we put a word down and it's a sound, and we see the word and we get a concept. But with the hieroglyphs, there are so many different interpretations of them, and the deeper you go, the more mystical and spiritual they become. How did you get drawn into this part of your research?
Well, it probably began when I was a very young girl, wanting to decide on my life path. I didn't know if I wanted to be a writer or a painter. And a funny thing, hieroglyphs, when I got into graduate school and had to learn another foreign language, I was fascinated with hieroglyphs because they were both, the art and the sound and the language. And the further I got into it, 10 years of study, just how does this work and how does that work? And, it really was fascinating to me. I've always loved language, but, hieroglyphs really, really sung to my heart,
Well, what fascinates me is that the scribes that wrote them, were the scribes that wrote them the actual person who was interpreting them, or I'm kind of, I go back and forth because it wasn't somebody dictating to them. It was, so who actually wrote?
They did. There were early scribes who carried on the tradition of being a sacred cantor, I guess. You would think of it as being a cantor in a temple or a church of some type, a cathedral. And so you learned the sacred language. There were proper tones and proper sequences, proper ways to make the sound holy, if you will, and so the priests who were lector priests inside these temples, when they were not working on their metaphysical work inside the temple, they were teaching scribe school. And so they had a number of students who would come to them and learn the hieroglyphs. Now, some of them obviously were better artists than others. Some were better singers, had better voices, could carry the vibration and the tone a lot better. But a true high priest could do everything. He could make the sounds. He could make the images. He could put things together so that it really sounded like poetry, And I would say one of the best high priest scribes that I could think of would be Akhenaten, who wrote the great hymn to the Aten that is nearly verbatim the same hymn as Psalm 104 in the Bible. It's almost exact. So certainly he was a poet that was well versed and well copied, at least well emulated.
Now, of course, we're talking thousands of years between the creation of the hieroglyphs and our trying to understand them. So,
yes.
So I mean, you go into such an amazing way of looking at them and experiencing them, and I'm wondering, does the person who is doing the interpretation today, does the level of consciousness they're able to reach for depend upon the level of consciousness within themselves?
I believe that is the case. I have read some translations of the hieroglyphs that were, well, I hate to say it, they were almost like gobbledygook because they didn't go deep enough. You know, It's like if you were studying the Hebrew language, and you're studying the Kabbalah is going to reveal a lot more to the Hebrew alphabet than what you would get in an abecedarian. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so a lot of that mysticism is inherent in the language itself. In that same way, with the Kabbalah and with the Egyptian hieroglyphs, it is a process of uncoding. Now, there's another woman, I have to say that I love what she has done. I didn't know of her when I started. I think she's younger than me, but her name is Susan Brend Morrow, and she is a beautiful translator of hieroglyphs.
Well, it just, to me...
Go ahead.
No, I you know, when reading how you had interpreted some of the material, there was definitely a sense of a spiritual awareness that was there. You were able to go much deeper than a lot of other people that, you know, History Channel and stuff like that. They, you know, so-and-so did this and so-and-so rode his chariot to here. But you took it so much further into the symbology of on a mystical, spiritual level that it added such a richness to what they were saying. I mean, not only with the Book of the Dead, but the Dead Sea Scrolls, with all of it. It really is a roadmap for spiritual ascension. And
I think
it's not...
the ancient Egyptians believed that it was a roadmap, that it was, that whole Book of the Dead was how to turn death consciousness into life consciousness, or how to be so fully alive in this life that you just step across a bridge into the next life. You know, everything that we do here as spiritual beings is basically practice for what comes in the afterlife. All of our dreaming life is practice for how to make changes into the next lifetime. And for me, trying to translate those hieroglyphs, when I first started it, you know, almost 40 years ago, I was fascinated with the idea that the ancient Egyptians thought that the most important thing and the most sacred thing that a scribe, a writer, could do would be to write his own Book of the Dead and to really understand it and know it. And that's why I started to translate it, because it was an ancient Egyptian scribe wrote that book, but I wrote my papyrus of Normandy was through Awakening Osiris. You know, I learned how to read the glyphs and see through it and try to bring it into my own consciousness, not just an ancient text.
Well, and I think that it was fascinating that the Book of the Dead and stuff differed in the different places within Egypt that it was written, so that, you know, there is definitely a different flavor to hieroglyphs depending on the geographic location of where you are in Egypt, or the time frame that you are,
or the time frame that you're in, exactly.
So you can see how the level of consciousness in the Egyptian people changed and shifted over. I mean, come on, it was what, 2,000 years that they stretched over, 3,000 years?
About 3,000 years of history that we know of, that we can actually compute, but believed to be much older than that. They can't just emerge full-blown. They must have developed through a period of time, so, yeah.
Well, it's kind of interesting because, if you're looking at, what history says, that it was Thoth that brought them the ability to write and to record. And,
that's right.
Frankly,
and some of the chapters were written by his own fingers, they say. That Thoth wrote 42 chapters of the Book of the Dead with his own fingers.
And you sort of wonder...
I think it's not just mythology to me,
Well, listen, I'm all for there was a Thoth. I do believe it. Done a lot of work with the Emerald Tablet material as well. The level of consciousness, and I don't know if Thoth was an extraterrestrial or what he was, but personally I believe that there was a Thoth. And if there wasn't, in my mind there is, so therefore there was. But I'll create it one way or another. If enough people believe in something, someone, they create an egregore that takes on a life of its own. So, either way you look at it. But I find it fascinating that the normal people of the time, they didn't play with the hieroglyphs. There had to be a scribe that wrote them down, because it wasn't like you go to school and you learn, hieroglyphs 1, 2, and 3, or anything like that.
Right. That's right.
So,
well, and it started out with only the priests were working with the hieroglyphs. And when the hieroglyphs were the most beautifully inscribed and beautifully written, the most pristine, was in the Old Kingdom. And it was a priestly occupation. Those people worked on behalf of the Pharaoh, who was considered the embodied God. And they had a kind of hive mind, if you will, where everyone worked on behalf of the community together, so that the farmers were doing their work as farmers and the priests were doing their work as priests. But, the interesting thing that I think is fascinating about it is that priests were also farmers. They would work in the temple for a season, which was basically 30 days. And then they would take off 30 days, and they would go and either run their scribe school or take care of their field, and taking care of your field was a beautiful occupation, because the fields themselves, the trees, the plants, the animals, were embodying the God spark. And so you were taking care of God, even though you were, marching through the field barefoot, putting seeds in the soil.
Well, I
it was
think
a sacred task.
That concept, I would love to see our politicians apply to themselves. I think it means a great deal more if you are truly a part of the community rather than, isolated from them. And
yes, exactly.
I think that the ancient Egyptians had it down, to a profound science, and it worked for the population, and it worked for even the royalty. So it kind of made the society far more effective, and like you said, 3,000 years is nothing to sneeze at. It
right.
definitely...
We haven't done that here.
No. But what also is fascinating is that so many philosophers went to Egypt to study in Egypt, because that's where the greatest insight and wisdom was centered. And of course, the library at Alexandria, and it's amazing that they gathered together as much as they did. One wonders
right.
how far back it actually went, because I think it had to be more than 3,000 years. I really do. And
I would think so
bet
too.
it just, to me, it was, I bet it predates the flood. It has to. Because the wisdom and the knowledge that was there was just phenomenal. I mean, nobody figured out how they got all those paintings done in the pyramids, not in the pyramids, but in the tombs without electric lights and stuff like that. So they had to have technology beyond what we've given them credit for, and they certainly had wisdom. And I think we're not just now breaking into understanding their cosmology and their understanding of life and creation. And I think one of the things that you suggested here, that there were three kingdoms and they had different mystery traditions, and you want to kind of go into that just briefly?
Yeah, I will. They span about, I would say, around 1,000 years each, give or take, 2 to 500 years each side. But starting back around 3000 BC, you have the Old Kingdom, and that was the pyramid culture, where most of the texts were written inside stone, on stone walls inside the pyramids. They were not inside the Great Pyramid, which I believe was an initiation chamber, not a burial chamber. I also believe, in my opinion, that the texts inside the Pyramid of Unas, which for a long time we thought those were the first, came from the 5th dynasty of the Old Kingdom. And they were very finely crafted in granite. They were carved into granite, or I should say onto granite, because some of them were bas-relief. And that's really almost impossible to try to get, the wing of a bird, which is the letter M, an owl, to come out from the stone. It's amazing feat. I don't know how they did it without lasers. I really don't. And these are just, row after row after row of hieroglyphs. There's no pictures, but the text is just magical, transformative. It's filled with what I consider the very first text of transubstantiating, which talks about, take, eat, this is my body given to you. It's like we're eating the body of the gods, and that's a text that's inside there. Climbing the Jacob's ladder, where the souls go up and down the ladder, is inside that text. There's just an amazing amount of stuff in there, body to earth, soul to sky, the thing that we always say at everyone's funeral. It's all inside this pyramid text of Unas. And it just blows me away that it was around 3000 BC that piece of writing and this beautiful poetry came out. And I'm talking about really, there's this lovely poem. I want it engraved on my tombstone. It's a hymn to the sky goddess Nut. And it goes, "Oh, great one who became sky, you are strong, you are mighty. You bend yourself above the whole earth, you embrace it. As you enfold all stars and people, so enfold me. Make of me an invisible star inside your body." Isn't that beautiful?
Oh, my gosh,
I love that poem. I love that poem, and that's like put in the burial chamber. You want to become a star inside the body of the goddess, the night sky. It's lovely, totally lovely. So then,
and that's like
5,000
years ago, and
yes, that's
what
5,000
gets me
years ago.
when people are talking.
Say again?
When people talk about ancient Egypt, they're talking quite often about people who were very primitive. And to me, that is not primitive.
No, that is not primitive. No. That really is about as sophisticated as you could get, because the language and the puns and the beauty inside it is such that it's like nothing we see these days very often. And then something happened. There came a time when the culture wasn't working really well, and it was overrun with populace, the cities were beginning to crumble. There were about 250 years where it looked like it was going to fall apart. And then the Middle Kingdom rises up. One man comes and brings the culture together. And so then you have the coffin texts. They start, okay, we're not going to just put them in the tombs. We're going to put these in the coffin texts. And that allowed people who were not wealthy an opportunity to contemplate and use some of these same texts for themselves and have them written on wooden coffins in which their mummified bodies were placed. That lasted for a while, and it developed what we call the Book of Two Ways, an understanding of the passage on the top of the earth and then beneath the earth, kind of like the sun across the sky and the sun moving through the underworld in the darkness, Ra in the sky, heaven and I will say underworld, but it's not necessarily hell in that way. Okay. And then there's another 500 years of disruption and conflict, and then suddenly another great pharaoh rises up, and you have the New Kingdom. And that's where most of what we know about ancient Egypt comes from the New Kingdom, where, that's where you have the Valley of the Kings and Queens, and Tutankhamun, Ramses the Great, the Queen Hatshepsut, all those folks, up until the Greeks took over. So that's mostly what we know of ancient Egypt, and it was more of a populist understanding of Egypt. You could go in to your local scribe shop and say, I want this chapter of the Book of the Dead, and this chapter, and this chapter, and this chapter, and I want to take those with me. And since I can't read, draw me some pictures to go with it so I know what it says. And so there was less true knowledge about what was going on, and yet it was also more available to people. So it was kind of a little bit of a trade-off.
Well, I think, too, I think one of the other things that you talk about is light consciousness, and how the element of light figured into all of the hieroglyphs, and it is no surprise after realizing how much they utilized light, light coming from the mouth, light going, it's light consciousness is here. It doesn't surprise me that Akhenaten decided to wipe out all of the other gods and just have the one sun god, which was the light. So how does the concept of the light consciousness, flow into all of this?
Well, the light consciousness is an understanding that there can be no illumination without darkness. One of the great metaphysical dictums is, if you want to hide something, hide it in the light, that's where nobody would look. They're not going, if it's totally bright, you can't see it. You know how you're driving down the road and all of a sudden you hit this white patch and you can't see anything in front of you? Yeah, so the shade and the shadows of Ra were equally as important as his illuminations, right? And I guess, to me, there's a great, wonderful metaphysical understanding of the shadows, kind of like where you're looking at Carl Jung and his work with the Red Book and his dream life, and trying to understand these parts of himself that were the edges of his own knowing, if you will. Do you know what I mean? Okay, so for example, Ra has 72 shadows that present themselves in the underworld. And these 72 shadows have particular names. Some of them are they're psychologically prescriptive in a way, or descriptive. And there's this picture of Ra, and his head is detached from his body, and it's like floating away. and the name over the shadow. Each shadow has a name, and this one is called "He Whose Head Is on Too High." So,
I know some
when
of
you
them.
think about that, yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, I have this great illumination, and I shine so bright, and, my head's way too high, and I can't, I really can't see myself because I'm so lost in my own brightness. There's another one of Ra called "He Whose Head Is on Backwards." And there are some people that I know like that too, who are lost in like, oh, I coulda, woulda, shoulda, those kinds of thoughts. Or bless him, the man who can't see his current wife because he's thinking about his dead wife all the time. He whose head is on backwards. Those kinds of things, becoming lost in the past. It's very interesting to me, or lost in regret, go ahead and name it whichever way you see it. He had 72 of these shadows that were really interesting, and all of them are in the process of transforming in the underworld. And so that is what you see on Tutankhamun's tomb when you are looking at some of these beings that have been carved on the side of his golden shrines, and you will see some of these shadows of Ra with their names and their process of transformation, and cobras spitting fire into their third eye or their crown chakra, or goddesses streaming energy out of the tips of their fingers, into the earth. It's just absolutely beautiful imagery.
Well, yeah, they were very deeply into analyzation to a degree that nobody ever gave them credit for. I mean, it just, to me, in looking at those, my shadow self, I have, I could name a whole bunch, and the fact that it was acknowledged that, I'm working on this, I'm working on that, I'm not quite there yet, but, this is something that's still following me around, and I may take it into the next life. And it just seems to me that there was so much, all of their stories illustrated archetypes that later on in time people say they invented, but they're right there. The hero's journey, the archetypes are in all of these stories. If you look for it, if you just, if you subliminally, just epitheurially, listen to the stories and you think that's a cute story of creation, yada, yada. But the reality is there are archetypes there that talk about the development of the soul, of the spirit, and the journey that it's on this lifetime. I mean, it was amazing.
It is amazing. Totally amazing. And a lot of stuff, just like you said, a lot of things that we think have been invented as fairy tales or myths or so on, like the Sorcerer's Apprentice, Mickey Mouse, making the broom break into half and dance. We remember that and we think, oh, that Walt Disney, that's an ancient Egyptian tale.
Oh, wow.
It's an ancient Egyptian tale of the Sorcerer's Apprentice and the guy who tries to make the Ushabti. They're called Ushabtis to do the work in the underworld. And he tries to make some and he can't stop them. So, very interesting.
Well, I think that your book certainly opens up one's eyes to the fact that they understood the development of the spirit and the expansion and the element of ascension and what it takes to get your spirit to where it needs to go, and basically, is it going to go on to the celestial rest home, or is it going to come back down on earth and work on some other aspects of the self? I mean, they were so deeply into the spiritual part of life that it amazes me that the history books haven't picked up on that and started to express it so people could understand where a lot of the stuff that we have today comes from. And you so beautifully have put it in this book and in your other book too. I think that and of course, you have to have had a past life there, or you wouldn't have been so integrated into all of this. I mean, it just, it doesn't take a mystic to figure that one out.
Well, I feel like I probably have, but I also like to think that maybe I'm been working on it diligently this lifetime too, so that I can go back into the past and do even better. Because I don't believe that we reincarnate forward only,
No, I would agree with that. That would make great sense. But I think the magic, they were very into the vibration too, and that's where the voice and the motion, that you don't have any examples of it, so you just don't know how powerful some of this stuff is.
Right. They hid it pretty well.
Well, was there any way
that... magic.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it just... And they wouldn't even talk it. So that...
Right, because if somebody knew how to take their magic, it could be misused. And so they were very protective of it. Even the sounds of the words, you and I were speaking earlier. It's like, is it Thoth? Is it Thoth? Is it, how do we say his name? And the ancient Egyptians write it, and it looks like Tahuti or Jehuti. I mean, they even wrote it different ways. And so I think that it's important to remember that that sound vibration is part of the magic of the work. And when you can't protect it, you just have to say, God bless it, they are taking care of it, Have you ever heard of Dorothy Eady or Om Seti? I'm sure you have come into contact with.
Yes.
The story of her. She had past lives in ancient Egypt, and she could speak the ancient language in the way that the ancient Egyptians did in order to do such things as send a cobra that's coming out of a wall to say the right word that will send it back where it came from.
Oh, yeah.
And she had to practice it and figure out, is it Seba? Is it Seba? Is it... But she came out with the right word, Seba. And then boom, the snake goes back where it goes. So it's kind of interesting that, we don't know exactly how it was pronounced, but if we play with it, we can hit upon a chord that vibrates within ourselves, that then we know that we are onto something.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to practice it with a cobra, though.
No. Nor I. Luckily, she knew what to do.
But yeah, I think that's something that's so important for people to understand, that while the symbols and the spiritual essence that is there is certainly profound, that there are many other levels that we haven't been able to access because we have no examples or anyone that can really teach it, but they utilize vibrational energy. I mean, and there's often been the philosophy that they used energy in order to move the stones that built the pyramids, and
right,
knowing what vibrational energy can do with the megahertz with music and energetics that can defy gravity and levitate things. I mean, it to me, their magic is something that we really don't totally understand, because while they wrote about it, we figured that was just a figment of somebody's imagination, and I don't think it was.
Yeah, right, and it's not. And, if you go on YouTube and you look at Steve Halpern with, he's got that plate of sand that he puts inside the coffin in the Great Pyramid inside the chamber, and he starts toning over this sand, and it begins to move into various shapes. The cymatics that Hans Jenny talks about, with the Sanskrit is also alive in all of the vowel work inside the Great Pyramids, and so you can actually physically see it moving. it was such a prized talent to be able to intone the psalms and the prayers properly, that that particular priest had his own title and was called True of Voice. So and so they could speak Hekama'at, the true magic, and true of voice. Yeah, and it was really interesting. I hope your reader, your listeners, can go to that Steve Halpern video on YouTube and look up the word cymatics in the Great Pyramid and actually see the way that sand moves as vowels are intoned across it. It's amazing.
Well, certainly all of us have experienced a piece of music that suddenly, when it was played, we tingled inside. There was something that was resonating with us, so that there was something going on, and it people will say, "Oh, I got chills." Well, of course you did. There was an energy there that your body was physically reacting to, and most people will just say, "Oh, it gave me chills. Isn't that amazing?" And they don't stop to think, what was that? How do I use that? How do I replicate it? How do I incorporate it into my own evolution? And I'm as guilty as the next person, because there have only been a couple of times in my life that I've had what I would call a mountaintop experience with energetics, and you want to get back to it, you want to recreate it, and it's difficult to actually recreate not only the sound, but where you were in consciousness when that happened, so that there was that synchronicity that your body reacted to.
Right.
But,
and I mean, I don't sing, so I cannot intone that way, but I write poetry. And I can tell when I've written a good poem, because I'll get that same kind of zap up my spine, like, oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I've done that with writing, and I would sit back and say, "Oh, did I really write that?"
Yeah.
It just.
I'm
wondering if other
I
people.
studied with. Oh, I'm sorry. I studied with Wendell Berry, who's a wonderful American poet, and he said to me one time, and this was the most important lesson I learned in my poetry class from him. He said, "Ms. Ellis, if it don't sound right, it ain't right." And he said it that way to make a point, but he said it that way to make a point. If it don't sound right, it ain't right. It's like, okay, I get that now.
But I think that is a quality that today we totally don't pay attention to, and and people aren't really doing that much speaking. They're texting, and they're bastardizing the language by not writing whole words, and there is a magic in being able to express yourself in a way that touches other people's hearts and souls. And I think that the Egyptians had it down, that it must have been quite an experience to be in the presence of someone who was working this kind of magic. If anyone has ever been at an ashram when thousands of people were toning or chanting the Om.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. It makes you heady.
And I love the word magic, because it comes from an ancient Egyptian word, which is Medju, Medju. And Medju Neter is the word of God. So Medju means word. It's word magic. And Neter is God, the word of God. But Neter is also all of nature.
Now,
and so, brooks are babbling, and they're speaking the language of God in the same way that the winds through the trees is speaking the language of God. It's all part of it.
What about the magi or the magi, the astrologers that theoretically followed the star to the birth of Christ?
Yes.
I mean,
well, those were probably Zoroastrian astrologers, but anyone who lived in an ancient culture out in the desert had access to an incredible amount of sky mythology and precision, astronomical precision, numerological, mathematical, geometric, and they were really adept at watching stars rise and fall across the latitudes. And many of the temples, not to mention the pyramids, are aligned to particular stars that rise on particular dates. And so there's this whole philosophy of archaeoastronomy that you can look into that will tell you how far back some of those temples were established, because the star that they're linked to is no longer the main star. It's moved in the sky now.
Yeah, the
after
pole
these
stars
thousands of years. Yes, the pole star in particular. Yep, Draco.
It used to be Thuban, way back.
Yes, Thuban. Yes, Thuban. Yeah, exactly.
No, it just, to me, you've uncovered such another pot of wisdom to look into, because along with the archetypes, along with the stories of creation, if you peel away the Egyptian mythology and just look at it spiritually, they had so much right that even current traditions like Christianity and Judaism and they've sort of overlaid all of the wisdom to the point where they've lost the point of the magic. And I think it's amazing to go back to what at this point in time I would consider the real source of a lot of these major religions actually was.
Right.
And it's only 5,000 years ago. I mean, it's not that far back. I mean, but
that we know of.
Yeah.
But then there are all the ancient Egyptian god kings. They were like semi-divine, who were before the very first, before Narmer, and they were called the sons of Horus, or the Shemsu Hor. And there were thousands of them, 10,000s of them, that lived before that, back to 10,000 BC. So, we have little petroglyph images of them out on the rocks in the desert, that we can find. So,
and the fact that, the fact that they've been recorded tells you that there's a part of history that we haven't yet discovered or uncovered or whatever. And I would think that with time we will find records of them to a certain degree. Again, it's sort of like they were not primitive. They were highly sophisticated. And to uncover where the sophistication came from will give you a deeper understanding of their concept of the soul's journey. And they believed in reincarnation. They believed in, the journey of the spirit. And it just, to me, it's so exciting to uncover all of this and realize that here's the spirituality that people are looking for today, and it's only 5,000 years old. And people are coming out with new books on spiritual development and ascension and stuff like that, but it's already there. Why don't they pay attention to it?
Right.
It's not new material, for sure. and it's so exciting that are there people who are trying to reproduce the toning and the pronunciation, and are they using technical equipment to register as megahertz and stuff like that to try to determine?
Yes, there are. And Jill Matson is one that I think is doing a lot of interesting work with the ancient language. I think his name is Mutabi, Ashi Mutabi. Oh, I cannot remember. Ashar Mutabi. I've read some of his work. He's pretty good. But the one thing that fascinates me in terms of working with the sound is those scholars who are studying the Coptic Christian priests who are praying in remnants of the language that is ancient Egyptian. And so that's where they're getting a lot of what they believe may have been the pronunciation is coming from these Coptic priests, Greek Orthodox and Coptic priests. It's very interesting.
Well, the solfeggio music came originally from the Gregorian chanting.
That's right. That's right.
That's frequency stuff, and and if anybody's interested in that, I think Ted Winslow puts out some amazing solfeggio music that does. I mean, it gives you shivers. It definitely touches something inside of you, and it's sort of like, okay, I got touched. Now what do I do with it? but the reality is that sometimes the vibration without words is more powerful than trying to explain it with words. It's because it'll be different for everybody. Everybody's in a different place as far as spiritual evolution. And so it wakes you up in ways that is appropriate for the individual. It's not a blanket, this is what it does to you and this is where you take it. It's each individual utilizes it as appropriate for their own energetic field. So it's amazing stuff, but it's I don't want to turn people off from religion because lots of people are religiously oriented and that's important for them, but at the same time there's magic that goes beyond the religion that doesn't necessarily in any way conflict with the religion, but it enhances your spiritual development. And I think studying the material in your book, especially the one that I just read, Imagining the World, Imagining the World into Existence.
Yeah.
I mean, it really does, in many ways, explain how you have control and power over so much of your life that you don't realize, and that all you need to do is to start activating that stuff inside of you, and your life changes. And a term I've used often, and I will use it until I find a better one, but if you get involved in this kind of material, it takes your life from black and white to technicolor in a heartbeat.
Yes, it does.
And
does.
You perceive things differently, and we do create our reality by our perception of it. So that understanding a lot of the Egyptian philosophies and what has been written and how to embrace it on a spiritual level is really important. And I think your books, all of them, lead to that. You in the two books that I've looked at, one I've read, one I've just looked at, you go into the spiritual philosophy and energetic behind the words, and you're very, very articulate about what it means and how it flows. And, I'm not going to do it, but if I were younger, I would definitely be tempted to learn to interpret the hieroglyphs because there is magic in it, and it's almost like a hieroglyph can trigger something in you so that you understand it to a greater degree and a different way. It gives you a different view of reality.
Yeah. We are worldwide, steeped in symbology, and whether we're looking at hieroglyphs or Mayan or Celtic runes, or the Kabbalah, or even Chinese glyphs, calligraphy. I think that we look at things and we can see spirit inside them. If you are a medium, for example, you can look at the entire world as if it's a spiritual message. And I think that's the whole point of learning hieroglyphs or any type of symbol system is to be able to take the message that is inherent in the image itself. And it's not just projection, because it is a spark of light that is constructed in a particular way that is being impressed upon your psyche. And, it's not an accident.
No. I truly believe also that probably every spirit on the planet at this point in time has had at least a lifetime or two in ancient Egypt. And so that it's a matter of looking at a hieroglyph, understanding what someone says it means, and then letting yourself flow into what it means to you. And it can unlock a lot of stuff inside of you. It's profound. I was fascinated with, because you give the hieroglyph, or you explain it, and then you go into a greater interpretation of it. And in many cases, I couldn't pronounce the names of the people that were connected to them, but the glyph itself, it triggered something inside of me. It was almost like, now that's familiar, now why, and what does it mean to me? And if you take the time to go that extra step, then you enhance your own evolution and your own spiritual understanding, and it will drive you to, I'm not saying everybody has to go into, hieroglyphs and interpreting them, but understanding that not only visually but sound and vibrationally, everything has something to do with your spiritual evolution, and if you are observant enough to grasp some of it, it enhances your ability to be a better person.
Yes. Yeah, agreed.
But I just noticed our time. We are out. And it went fast.
Flies. It flies when you're having fun.
Yes, it does. But let's see. Did I put down your website? I did someplace.
It's pretty easy to remember. It's normandyellis.com, and spell Normandy with an I instead of a Y.
Mm-hmm. And you do tours to Egypt and shamanic journeys and stuff like that. So you do a lot of providing people with the ability to reach inside themselves and find another level of understanding of their own personal spirit. So I encourage everybody to. And she's only written 14 books or so. So you are an expert for sure.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes, cool, I'd love to have you and any of your guests come with me to Egypt. We are going twice a year now through twoladies.travelco.com. And, it's always 2-week trip, lovely experience.
I would love to. I just, I am not a homophobe, but living out of a suitcase is not my thing. Something that you might think of doing, and certainly you're highly qualified to do it. While going to Egypt would be cool, doing remote viewing is also very cool.
Yes, it is.
and so I would. I know that a long time ago I did a remote viewing journeying with people. I had about 50, 100 people, and we did remote viewing, and the Great Pyramid was one of them. And we did it online, and so on my website there's a section, a button you can push, that you can listen to the meditation that took us remote viewing into the Great Pyramid and the Chinese Emperor's Pyramid. We did pyramids all over this world.
Fabulous.
And the short meditation is there, and there's a place where you can leave your impressions as well. It's a blog. Mm-hmm. So you please don't listen to the first couple of them, because we were just breaking into, I found that people stopped journeying when I stopped talking, so I had to continue to talk. So the first couple of ones were trial and error, getting people all together as a group. But we did the Bosnian pyramid, and we did pyramids on the moon. So, and the meditations were short, 15, 20 minutes, so they weren't horribly long.
That's fabulous. Yeah. I'll look up those.
Yeah, the meditation is there. You can click and be a part of the meditation and go along with us. They were very. I'm seriously thinking of starting them up again, but that's remote viewing, and it's another form of travel where you don't have to pack anything, and your bathroom is right next door. So.
Yeah.
But I want to thank you so very much for sharing your information with us. I so appreciate your time and your energy, and certainly your book was fabulous to read.
Oh, thank you, Barbara. It was really great to be on your show.
Oh, we'll get you back. You have 14 books. We can do this again.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Thanks again, and good
night. You
night.
take care now. All right.
You too.
Good night.
Okay. Good night. Thank you, everybody. This will be up on YouTube later on tonight, or for sure tomorrow. And if you enjoy it and some of the other interviews that we have on board, please subscribe to the channel. That's how we know you're actually listening, and we're not just talking into the ether. Well, we are actually talking into the ether, but we know somebody's listening. That's the important thing. So thank you for being here. Tomorrow night, Mark Eddy will be with us, and then we'll be back again next Monday. Have a great one, everybody.